Yeah, but
Ready?
you look great. You look great. So,
Thank you.
hello, Ari. Very nice to finally meeting you. And I'm a big fan of your bands, Campbell Apartment and the Pelicans. Always been a big inspiration for my music and whatever I do.
Thank you, Jack. Really means a lot to me. Nice to meet you finally.
Thanks. And I was thinking actually that this conversation between me and you could be useful to any band out there that are trying to make music their life.
Yeah. I certainly have a lot to say on the subject, and I've been trying, to make it my life, not to have to work another job for 35 years or so. Yeah, it's
Well,
a
how
really long
did you
time.
start actually? Do you have anyone in your family that plays music?
No, I don't. I immigrated as a refugee from the former Soviet Union to the United States. And in the former Soviet Union at the time, there wasn't music, full stop. Like, there's children's music, and I was a kid, but not even really. It was mostly sort of Soviet anthems that were propaganda type music. So there wasn't like popular music. You didn't have access to the Beatles or anything. So once we were here, and I was still a little kid, I sort of liked Kiss for a year because they were gory because I was a little boy. But I'd never
Yeah.
actually heard them. And then when I got into the Beatles, something woke up inside me. I think well, everything. I mean, they changed everything, and they're still the best there ever was. I think just song to song. They weren't even around for that long, but just there was very few songs that weren't very good.
When you actually picked up the guitar first time in your life?
I was about 10, and my parents sent me to Launchie School of Music in Cambridge, Mass. For classical guitar
Cool.
because they figured that's a good basis to start. So that's where I learned to fingerpick. And before too long, I asked the teacher to teach me like a Paul McCartney song instead of a
That's cool.
classical thing. He didn't really teach me chords. He sort of taught me like the melody and the bass, like as a classical person would play it. I
Do
mean,
you play any
uh,
other instrument than
I
guitar?
play
Um,
well, bass, like any guitar player can play bass, but I play the piano as well. But I want to get to that point where like the guitar and the piano are interchangeable in terms of being able to play it like the Beatles or um, like Badly Drawn Boy, who was an amazing artist from England, but a lot of people.
when you are playing music or mainly writing music on the same instrument, that sooner or later happens that you lose a little bit the inspiration. Then you have to swap or switch to a different instrument, and then the inspiration strikes back or comes back all of a sudden.
It can do, yeah. I suspect, and I've never researched this, but that the Kinks, Ray Davis wrote a lot of stuff on the piano and then transposed it to guitar. And some of their stuff was piano based, but most of it was guitar based. But just the writing seems like something you wouldn't come up with in the guitar. It's just, I mean, he's a genius, but on the piano, you kind of could. But I'm primarily a guitarist, and in the live concerts, I've never played piano. There usually isn't one at the clubs.
Yeah, I think I started on guitar too when I was a kid. In my family, no one plays any instrument, so I just remember my mom listening to music on the stereo. About I was 5, maybe 6
Mm.
years old, and I was singing along with her. And
Mhm.
I remember that every time that I was singing, it was so funny for her that she was just recording on a tape my voice, and it
Oh,
should be still there on a tape, on a cassette that she saves. And every time that I go visit them, my parents, she plays for me. It's so embarrassing.
well, it's probably a good record keeper of your origins.
The way you write for the Campbell Apartment is the same you write for the Pelicans, or
Yeah, it kind of varies. I'm not as prolific as I should be, and now that I have all the free time in the world, I should like try to write a song a day. Because if I was on commission and for like an advertising agency, then I could easily
yeah.
write a song a day. Or if I was writing for other people, I wouldn't have to have the standard that I've set for myself, where it's hard to write a song a day and meet all those standards that I have. But generally, if I'm trying to write a song, I'll sort of noodle around and come up with a riff and kind of come up with
Okay.
the musical bits. And sometimes they write themselves. Like, if I'm playing the same riff over and over and then I accidentally hit a different chord, I'm like, oh, this is the chorus. Dun, dun, dun. And it sounds like a clever thing, but it was really just like a modulation, but it wasn't intentional. And other times they'll just write themselves, like the song "I Know What I've Done" wrote itself because I was so offended by Trump, the candidate mocking that disabled journalist at the New York Times. But usually it's girl related, either like getting over something in my past. That's like the only way to deal with the pain is to put it into music. And if a great song comes out of it, it doesn't help you get over it sooner, but it helps you validate that, you have worth if something didn't work out. I think the most important thing is to not care or even conceptualize what people will think. And then you can really write great songs. Because, if you're trying to get signed to Sub Pop, and when Nirvana fell apart, they started signing softer band. There's just no point of doing that because your music won't be honest. And if you do it just for your own amusement, which after 35 years, I just do it for my own amusement. And I guess my fans expect, to deliver good songs on a semi-regular basis. And I want to satisfy the kids out there.
But first time that I was listening to the Campbell Apartment, I was totally in love with the melodies because they remind me a little bit of the Beatles for sure. But it was something I never heard before.
And like to digress a little bit, if you write something that sounds like the Foo Fighters or that sounds like X, Y, and Z, you're much more likely to get on the radio. People want background music that kind of resembles other songs. And if you're listening to a Spotify Pavement playlist that has other stuff that sounds like Pavement, that's different because you're already seeking like independent music that doesn't sound like mainstream radio does. Like Interpol sounded exactly like Joy Division to me, and I'm old enough to know, like, guys, I know what you're doing, but nobody knew unless they were like old enough to know Joy Division.
Like Oasis ripping off the Beatles.
Yeah, but I think Beatles meets punk, I think they describe themselves as Beatles crossed with the Sex Pistols, just because they do have that like fisticuffs potential, and the Beatles were all peace and love.
Recording back in the days compared to nowadays, has it changed for you?
In the beginning, there was no digital stuff, so it was pretty expensive, just the 2-inch tape. Like we made the second Campbell Apartment album that Jody Porter from Fountains of Wayne produced and played on in a studio that was very against digital. They used 2-inch tape, and it was like the Grateful Dead's console, and they were really proud of all that. I can't hear the difference because if it ends up as an MP3 or on a CD, and then like what we're recording now with this guy around the corner who was the director of engineering at Pandora, he and I have the same sort of stony ideas. He'll think of them before I even think of them, but we have this brain meld, and then he'll mix something and just so elevate it. It's almost like Lou Reed because his songs were kind of simple and it was mostly poetry set to a fairly simple music, but then he had these ringers that played with him that were so fantastic. But it's more than that because my songs aren't simplistic, and it's not about all the money in the world because this guy is just trying to like not have a day job and not work in tech and not to be a producer. And I keep saying this is going to be the album that allows us both to make music for a living. When I wrote Bay Area Robot Farm to impress a girl that worked on a Bay Area robot farm, she was a business prospect from my last job. And she told me she worked at a robot farm in the Bay Area, and I was like, that's a great song title. And then when I followed up with her to see if she wanted to buy her crap, I was like, that song's coming along. And she said, I'm excited to hear it in any stage of readiness. So then I was like, oh crap, I only have Bay Area Robot Farm. Like I didn't even write words or music. I sort of drew a chart of what happened and ran across the street, block and a half away to this guy's house because he was like, yeah, come over. And then he mixes unbelievably well and masters it loudly like was done in the 90s, like Dinosaur Jr. I could just like with him around and available and excited about the project, I should just keep writing and like until I find that best song I've ever written.
You usually record the full band together, or you prefer to record each instrument separately?
Before COVID, we would record the basic tracks first, which was like, I've always had a 3-piece. The Pelicans was a 4-piece. But basic tracks are like where the drummer and the bass player, and it's the natural way, it's the best way to do it, are playing together, and I'm playing scratch guitar and scratch vocals that may or may not be kept. And then over that, I'd overdub harmonies and guitar parts and the guitar solos and do comps, do a bunch of guitar solos and the producer would comp. And during COVID, we made a bunch of recordings that we put on YouTube where I'd write a song and like to a click track, or songs we already had that were kind of recorded in some form or another, and the drummer would record to with the headphones and then send the recording to the bass player who would record his part, but video it too. So they were like music videos. We're still not really rehearsing, and the recordings are like piecemeal. Like the drummer will send his drum part based on like my demo to a click or whatever it is, and the bass player, and then I'll do my parts, which I'm a very fast vocal take. Sometimes the first vocal take will be the one. Like when I was young, I tried to drink and smoke and sound like Tom Waits, but then when I got older, I was like, this is unhealthy. But by then, I already had that grit in my voice. The producer is always surprised by my range because I have like the voice I'm speaking with now, but then I also have like a really high falsetto and everything in between. I can play rhythm guitar, and I wrote the songs, but the guitar solos, take some time to get right, and they're comped oftentimes. I used to solo Jay Mascis style, but not obviously, it's not as good as him. Just got a little rusty during COVID just because I was so isolated. I just didn't feel like making music that much.
How your life has changed across the years, and you're still listening to the same kind of music nowadays as back in the days?
I mean, you introduced me to Archers of Loaf when Fountains of Wayne moved to Western Mass, where I was living, and we became tight friends with each other. I was like, are they Archers of Loaf? Because I'd never heard of Fountains of Wayne, so I kind of confused the two. And then when I listened to Fountains of Wayne, I was like, wow, this is very catchy and accessible and melodic and smart and everything I like. I don't know why they're an underground band that isn't more successful, but then I never gave Archers of Loaf a listen because I kind of figured they'd be kind of like, what's that North Carolina band? It's Superchunk. And we opened for Superchunk once, and the guy was kind of a dick to the sound man, so I was like, I'm not going to listen to that. But now that you've told me about Archers of Loaf, it's great. I love it. But yeah, by and large, I listen to Kinks or the Beatles or like Pavement and Weezer and Ween and Wilco.
Myself, recently I got into this new punk scene, just discovering new bands from everywhere, like social medias or Spotify, Bandcamp, YouTube. Recently I was like listening a lot to The Wonder Years, Sincere Engineer, Goalkeeper. Washing Machine is more like shoegaze, noise rock, but they're really cool. Bring the Hoax, The Farewell Project. But a good band that I really love the most called Coastal Fire Department. They're really good. Just to give some tips to the bands out there, how do you guys promote yourself?
I mean, you're a huge inspiration for that, and I've only known you for not super long. I've just been like in the game for so long that I have contacts. I guess I work for Danny Goldberg's label Artemis because of a Fountains of Wayne A&R guy named Michael Crumper. So I'll send him my music once every 5-10 years if I think there's something like really special. And he always writes back, and he always listens. He was the manager of Nirvana and like a publicist for Led Zeppelin, so he's a living legend. But those types of people tend to be the most like responsive and nice. And labels like Bar None in Hoboken, New Jersey, again through Fountains of Wayne. Other than that, I think I've been pretty crappy about it. Just because I've been in sales for 22 years, so it was really hard to muster the energy to then sell my music. And it just felt kind of like knocking on doors, selling insurance or talking about Jehovah. I've tried, and when I've hired publicists, they're not cheap. They have much bigger artists that they'll get ink first because people have heard of them. And like when we toured England, there was an English promoter and he got us quotes and some articles. Things either kind of happen organically where enough people like your music and you're sort of critically acclaimed or influential, which I could say that I am, but totally not famous. Either like Trustafarian money, like the Strokes didn't really need to work, and like an amazing demo tape that circulated around, or people with nothing to lose, like somebody that doesn't aspire to have a real job and can just wash dishes and tour relentlessly and then go back and get another job at a restaurant. Touring relentlessly, I've never done. I've done short tours a few times, but that's probably the way to get discovered, is because also like bands that tour come back from that tour so much better as a band because it's like nightly rehearsal. So it's helpful to become much better, but also that the first good time around doesn't make a difference. It's when you come back that people like have seen you and will tell their friends. But other than that, like if I had the secret, saw us, I'd be famous already. And, you're doing an incredible job of it.
I'm just trying out new things. If I have a chance to be on a podcast and a radio show, I'll just say yes.
I mean, I haven't been approached. So if the fact that you're being asked is already like makes you kind of famous, that you're not reaching out to these bloggers and podcasters on your own.
In the beginning, it was me reaching out. I was no shy with emails, getting in touch
Right.
with as many people as possible. If you go to show, if you go to a bar, to a club, spread a little bit of positive vibe, attitude, they will remember you.
Yeah.
And then if you ask them to listen to your music, they will do it.
It's good to you're right, to know more about other people's music, that especially if they're not like a household name, as a way to just like enhance your own music, but also, like you said, spread positivity by supporting local shows, by attending them. I saw Bob Mould once with Sugar, and he uses a Stratocaster, and to go from like Quiet, Loud, Quiet, which the Pixies got from Husker Du, and I think Nirvana did too, he just does his hand in the volume knob. So he's playing like clean, and then he'll just slip his hand to turn up the volume on a Stratocaster all the way, and you get that wall of sound, like huge Bob Mould Sugar sound. And I was like, that's clever. That's why he plays a Strat.
Have you ever felt to give up and say, this is the biggest mistake that I made?
No. I mean, I recently had a conversation with a guy who's been a correspondent with CNN for 40 years. And like 30 years ago, when I was graduating from college, something happened on campus to do with the newspaper. I was editor of the op-ed section. Anyway, CNN flew to interview me, and this guy was like, give me a call. And he was already like a legend if you watch CNN. And I didn't give him a call because I figured he was in Atlanta. I didn't want to move to Atlanta and pursue a career in journalism because I already had my college band and I didn't want to dissolve it. So upon graduating, I moved to New York. Turns out he was in New York. And then my bandmates from Western Massachusetts took the sort of 3-hour drive to New York to play shows. And I would go up there to play shows. And we were pretty getting somewhere. But I'm so impulsive that I met a girl who was London-based and just moved to London. And I moved to New York because Chris from Fountains of Wayne said, you kind of are the band and you need to move to New York. So I wouldn't say it's a mistake that I didn't call up Gary Tuchman and start a career in journalism. I mean, I wouldn't have my 2 little girls if I went back in time and changed even one thing. The biggest mistake I could make is to sort of stop.
Don't stop, please.
Yeah,
Don't do it.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really nice. Sitting alone in my house, I kind of assume nobody's listening. And that like brings me to another point. Even if I have like 100 fans around the world, that's 100 people that like my music. That's the same as like billions or millions, and there was like maybe one specific instance where we were playing Mercury Lounge in New York City, which is a prestigious but small venue. And Tegan and Sarah packed the room. And then we were going on after them, and we were so excited, jumping up and down. And as soon as they finished, literally everybody left. And we went on, and there was one girl in the crowd. And I was like, after 5 songs, I was like, screw it, to the sound man, And then it turned out she was loving it. She was from France, and she just went to Mercury Lounge on a whim. And I was like, damn, like I'll always remember that one person is the same as 100 people is the same as like a household name, billions and millions of fans. So who cares how many people are in the crowd? You can't rip off the couple of people. And
I think the best shows that I had was when the dance floor was empty. Nobody was left there. Just the drunk people, the one that they're there, but then not even listen to you.
Because then you didn't have to try very hard, and it was just loose and natural and more fun.
I think just to prove yourself that you're still good. Nobody's left. So now we'll take our revenge. We played best show ever.
People in bars, like most people play bars until they get famous and they start playing theaters. And so you're effectively playing to people that are gradually getting drunker and drunker. But if you play a killer set, they'll remember.
Where are you guys heading to? Any future goals for both bands?
I mean, the Pelicans was a project that I had after I moved back from London. And that album was actually 2 EPs in 2003 and 2005. Those people have kids and are, working for Ogilvy, and they're still friends of mine, but there's not a band. That was like something that was in the vault for 20 years. And then I said to the record label guy, how about releasing this? Because this was released before streaming services and nobody really heard it. We pressed like a couple of 100 CDs and I sent it to some journalist, and that was that. Nobody really heard it. So he released it as 1 LP, London Crawling.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful record, I think. I love Summer Jingle, We Just Don't Get Along. Like a Flop, amazing songs. I've been listening to this since you actually told me about it.
Yeah, and it doesn't come up on Google because it had enough hits on Spotify to come up on Google. So for people to hear it, I have to actually send them the link to the Pelicans album, and then people go, "Yeah, this is really pristine." And like on Like a Flood is the only time where I sang like in a really low register, and I kind of did a little fluctuation that was like Jonathan Richman. Oh, and I'm glad that I never pretended, or Lou Reed, But because when you do a talky thing, then people feel like you're talking to them. And then We Just Don't Get Along has that little "you can't always get what you want" French horn bit counter melody. Like the second half of London Crawling was, I got on the show Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and I was made over. It was a big reality show that was really popular in the US. And when I found out I'd be on it, we rushed out a second EP of 6 songs. So I wouldn't say they weren't as strong, like You Can't Tell the Difference, which is awesome. And Summer Jingle was from the second one. But that was me trying to like actually write a radio hit because I'd be on television.
Are you guys recording a new record or?
Yeah, so I sent you Bay Area Robot Farm, which is going to be released this week, any day now, across all streaming services. And then Fun in the Sun and Sand and Glue.
Amazing song. Wow.
Thank you. Sand and Glue.
Yeah, that one too.
That's my singing at the top of my register. It's what I do. It's like if you sing at the bottom or the top, there's something emotional and passionate and true that resonates with people, Like Wayne Coyne from Flaming Lips is like singing almost too high for himself, but therein lies the beauty because his voice is fragile up there. Or Liz Phair, who I adore, sings at the bottom of a register, and there's also something intimate about that because it's almost like a whisper. We're recording a new album. I feel like it's going to be the best one based on early results sonically because of the producer. So I'm hoping that will be the one that has an organic kind of life of its own without me having to knock on too many doors. So once we have the 11, 12, 13 songs and we've finished about 6 of them, I guess, it should be released this year. And I have like a standard for this record that's higher than the standards I've had in the past, partly because of all the experience I've gained as a writer.
You don't want to be lost in the scroll down, I usually say. So if you're constantly releasing the content, then helps to the audience to say, oh, the Campbell Apartment is still around.
If you don't stay relevant and you disappear for 3 years and then come out with an LP, people have already, their lives have changed and they might not really remember. But if you release them as singles like once a month or whatever, like the song St. Charles and the song Cheryl Noble have already been released for a while. And they're really strong too. We're just going to keep releasing them as singles with maybe like a month gap in between or so. And that sort of keeps you writing too, keeps you working.
For the people that are actually going to watch this video, should we share where they can find your music?
Well, our website is weareindierock.com. The most bombastic ideas that seem obvious sometimes don't somebody else doesn't think of it first. But also Spotify, if you just type in the Campbell Apartment in Spotify or whatever your favorite streaming service is. Facebook.com/the Campbell Apartment or Instagram.com/the Campbell Apartment.
Are you guys trying TikTok?
Our bass player, since he left the corporate world, has taken over Twitter, finding people to follow on Twitter that are influencers or just bands he likes. Networking. He's just done a great deal in the last sort of 6 months, and TikTok as well. I'm like a little bit averse to just opening my laptop and being on a screen. I'd rather read a novel or go for a walk, but he's taken that part, and chances are that's how we break, because like social media organic growth, like TikTok, is how people become famous these days.
As I usually say, it's like every single social media has its own audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad like that somebody else in the band is doing that piece.
And Ari, did you watch the Beatles documentary?
Yeah, sure, twice. If you can get through the first third, which is quite sad, they didn't want to show up at that gigantic cold studio in January. The second and the third installment were so inspiring and so great. Just made me remember why I love being in a band.
So I would like to say that my first time that I decided to speak with one of my favorite artists ever, it was really nice talking to you. Such a pleasure.
The honor is mine. Thanks, Jack. I love your music too. So I'll talk to you soon.